G'day there folks, I'm Beanie, you're watching Beanie Draws, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to draw this much requested and epic battle scene between Tyrannosaurus Rex and Indominus Rex. So hold on to your butts, and let's get right to it. For this particular drawing, we're using these three shots as our inspiration. They're highly dynamic and I love the intensity of the action. The main thing is that there wasn't one specific image that was exactly how I wanted to draw it, so I've kind of used my imagination to put my own spin on it. First of all, what we want to do is we want to split our page into two sides, one side for Indominus Rex, one side for Tyrannosaurus Rex, so what we'll do is we'll put a line in between and that gives each side some equal spacing. The next thing you want to do is you want to start building up the construction of the body, and to do this I use a combination of cylinders, ovals, circles and other basic shapes. Think of it as a more advanced version of a stick figure, or kind of like one of those posable mannequins that you can buy at an art store. So you can see here that I've used some large eggish shaped ovals to represent the bodies, and smaller circles represent the shoulder joints. I've also given Indominus Rex a curved line for its neck, and Tyrannosaurus Rex a more sort of angular curved line for its neck. Then proceeding to draw down the basic shape for Indominus Rex's head, which I guess you could describe as another egged shape oval. Then we go back to using ovals again to form the structure of its arms. Some more egg-shaped ovals, one for the thigh and a smaller one for the leg. And you'll notice I made the top end of the egg closer to the tail a little bit lighter so it's not as hard of an edge connecting it to the body. Then we jot in some basic lines for both Indominus Rex and T-Rex's tail, and then we continue on by adding the extra shapes for Indominus Rex's other leg. Then we block in the most basic elements at the ankles, and then we give the hands three very simple basic fingers just to give an indication where the fingers will be. You'll also notice that I gave each finger a very basic looking hook which indicates the claws. So I'm just going to pause it here for a little moment and give you a chance to absorb what I've just done. And that's basically what I do whenever I want to learn to draw something. I pause and I observe, I study visually what's just happened, I take it all in, and then after that I go on from there. So what we have is we have the basic construction shapes of the two dinosaurs fighting. There's no detail in that at the moment, but I've overlaid the Tyrannosaurus's head over the neck of the Indominus's neck to indicate that it's going to be biting it eventually, and I've made the Indominus Rex's head with its mouth open so it looks like it's in a bit of pain. I've given Indominus Rex some arms that are sort of grasping, it's kind of clawing at Tyrannosaurus Rex. I've also drawn the Tyrannosaurus Rex's legs in a position and stance so it looks like it's using its body weight to smash the Indominus Rex into what eventually will be a building. It's not there at the moment, but it will be. And then from that point on, we start to refine it, add some lines and build the construction up from there, adding and removing where we need to, and just finely tuning and refining as we go along. At this point, we begin to start drawing in more refined lines for the shoulders, for the thighs, the back and stomach, refining the image, making it look a little bit more precise. After refining the arms and the belly, we also begin to move around the hips of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, also refining the stomach and the tail area, making those thigh and calf muscles really strong. And taking you a bit closer now, I'll show you how to draw the Tyrannosaurus foot. Because of the way that I recorded the drawing, it's in a bit of a time-lapse fashion. As you can see, things are just kind of showing up. But I can explain that I drew the toenails first. When I draw a dinosaur feet, I always draw the toenails first, and then I draw the top half and then the bottom half of the padding bits of the toes. But there you can see the top half of the toes and then the bottom half. I'll be adding more detail and refining this foot later on in the video. Then I start adding some lines into the neck area, and then the back of the head, and starting the eyebrow ridge of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then adding a little bit more neck as we start towards adding in the shoulder and arm. As you notice, the shoulder actually has a bit of a ridge that goes from the neck to the shoulder, and the shoulder itself is on a bit of a bowl shape. Then we add in the arm shape, and then we get towards the fingers, which I usually do a narrow bit of finger, and then the connecting part that goes to the nail, I make that as a sort of a padded bowl shape. And then I usually add the claws of the fingers last, even though I usually start with the claws first when it comes to feet. Now moving back to the T-Rex, we start working on the back of the head and the up of the neck, which has a curved, sharpish curved neck line. And then we also start working on its very distinct eyebrow ridge, which is very sharp and very distinct. It's at this point where I start to realize that the Indominus Rex's body and neck aren't really going to fit in the Rex's mouth at this point, so we have to reposition the body by erasing some of the lines for the back and adding some new lines for the back. Then we refine the T-Rex's mouth a little bit more, and then we start to reposition and therefore redraw the Indominus Rex's head. And just like how I did it with the blocking out of the initial sketch, we yet again draw it out in a very blocking out manner. So we've got the top half of the head and the bottom half of the head, which is the jaw. And because we've changed the back placement of the Indominus Rex, he's looking a bit chubby, so we have to change the chest and the shoulder, just so its body looks more in proportion and in the right kind of shape. Then we move on to the head and get the head more refined, changing the shape a bit. I leave the placeholder shape there with all the lines just to give me an idea and a reference from where the image used to be. And you can see now that I'm reshaping the mouth, giving it a nice flowy curve, and we do that to the bottom of the jaw as well, giving it a stronger curved line. And a straighter edge for the bottom of the jaw. Trademark horn on the top of its head. I didn't initially like how it looked a little bit too big, so I drew a line inside to replace it and reshape it, make it a bit smaller, and erase some of the extra lines of its head. Added 2 of those spiky shapes, and adding some little bits of detail here and there for the eye position and for the eye indentation. Then I draw in the eye, which is a sort of a horizontal half moon shape, and then we cut into the back of the Indominus Rex's head to get a more refined shape, because it does have a very distinct shaped head. Then we draw some lines that indicate the indentation, the snout area, and it's always important to give Indominus Rex some nostrils so it can breathe. Next we're going to put in the starting lines that indicate the tough ridges along its snout. And at this point, we're also going to start drawing in the basic teeth shape. We'll be refining this further down the track. Drawing a simple curved line acts as a membrane that connects the lower part of the jaw to the upper head. And speaking of lines, I like to use lines as a way of slowly refining the shape of the jaw, as you can see what I'm doing here. Adding extra refinement and bringing the chin out a little bit of Indominus Rex, because it does have a slightly longer chin jaw. It's got a bit of an underbite, I guess you could say. And as a matter of fact, the creators of Jurassic World were saying that they actually intentionally gave the Indominus Rex a deliberate underbite to give it a bit more menacing look. And on the topic of menacing looks, we're going to give it that menacing look by adding a whole bunch of serrated teeth now, much like we did on the top. Keep in mind that some of the teeth are at slightly different angles. Some are pointing forward, some are pointing back, some are quite large, and some are a little bit smaller as well, giving it that really ferocious look. And now that we've got the teeth in place, we can start erasing lines and start cleaning up the jaw a little bit. Now using a multitude of different lines, we're going to start refining the eye socket and snout indentation some more. And once we've got that out of the way, we can begin drawing in the lines near the back of the skull for the indentation near the ear. Moving back to those ridges along the snout now, as you can tell, we're now going to start refining all the lines and making them a lot more solid, as well as really emphasizing that eye socket. We're soon going to be working on the neck area, but first we want to refine and tidy up around the horn and removing a lot of that messy line work around the snout area. At this point I can see that the front teeth need a little bit more definition to contrast nicely with the bottom teeth, and then start working on the spikes in the horns and scoots and the rough detail along the back of the neck. And now it's time to focus on the back area of the Tyrannosaurus's neck. We're going to add some curved lines to emphasize the cylindrical nature of the neck, then adding a bit of a line to divide the back of the head from the neck, and then drawing a circular line for the snout indentation area. Then we draw a line that goes from the tip of the snout to the back of the head, which also divides the left and the right hand side of the head, giving a more three-dimensional vibe. Then we redraw over the lines at the front of the snout, re-emphasizing and making them bolder, adding a line from the left side to the right side of the eyebrow ridge, and then finishing up refining the shape of the snout with adding a few more lines here and there. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky, so make sure you're paying attention. As it currently stands, it kind of looks like Tyrannosaurus Rex is kind of fused in with Indominus Rex with where its mouth is placed. What we want to be showing is this is the point where the Indominus Rex's shoulder meets Tyrannosaurus Rex's edge of the mouth. T-Rex is going to have its mouth really wide open to fit Indominus Rex's neck inside its mouth, and to do that, we're going to draw a very wide stretched out membrane that will connect the top of its head with the jaw. So now we're going to draw a line that represents the completion of the top half of the head, and then we draw a line for the back of the jaw, and then a line for the membrane that connects the top and the bottom of the jaw. Now, the reason why I'm adding in a light dose of Tyrannosaurus Rex jaw in behind the Indominus Rex is so you can see how the neck kind of fits in the mouth of the T-Rex. Gives you a bit more of a 3D vibe. Naturally, it won't be staying there, but I thought I'd put it in there just to give you a visual idea of how everything fits together. And now we're going to add in 3 main wavy lines which are going to indicate the main veins and arteries of the Tyrannosaurus Rex's neck. And then we're going to add in some lines that indicate the folds in the skin of the neck. We're also going to chuck in a few more of those curved lines to add to the texture of the neck, drawing a curved line around the ear section of the head, a line that refines the connection of the head to the neck area, and then we'll draw a series of dots which will indicate the bumps that run along the back of the neck. Now we're going to bring our attention in on the Tyrannosaurus Rex's eye socket area. To do this, we're going to draw a curved line that represents the bony protrusion coming from behind the eye socket, and another line for the bony protrusion at the front of the eye socket. Then we're going to draw 2 curved lines that represent the trademark eyebrow ridge of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And now I'm bringing up a close-up view so you can see how I use circular lines to continue emphasizing the eye socket area. Now we're drawing a few more lines to draw in T-Rex's eye, and then we draw a series of scales that run along the nasal passage indentation in the skull, and you'll notice these scales gradually gain bigger and bigger until it eventually reaches the eyebrow ridge. Now we'll remove those thick, rough, sketchy lines that we used to jot in T-Rex's eyebrow ridge, and instead we'll replace them with a thin, sharp, wiggly, wavy line that will emphasize the bony nature of T-Rex's eyebrow ridge. Chuck in a handful of small, round, oval shapes to go around the perimeter of the eye socket, an extra line to add a little bit more refinement to the snout hole, another line, but lighter, for the ear indentation area, and then we're going to draw in a series of scales that are going to line that ear flap. Now we're going to get a little bit closer as we start to refine more of the top of the head and around the snout. But before we continue for a moment, I just want to pause and highlight this seemingly insignificant, but actually very important fold line. This line actually represents the middle of the snout, but it's also what's going to divide the middle from the right hand side of the snout, which is going to give you that illusion of 3-dimensionalism. And now you can see that line continuing on along the snout. Finishing the tip of the snout, we now draw the nostril, and 2 vertical lines that begin the skin texture, and a couple of little scales on the cheek. Much like that curved line that we drew behind Indominus Rex's eye socket, it's also a good idea to draw a little hooked line behind T-Rex's eye socket to kind of give that ear indentation look. Now we're going to draw some of those fierce Tyrannosaurus Rex teeth, and I like to draw the whole thing to begin with, even if they're going to be synced into skin, because afterwards you can just erase the tips. It's just a lot easier to draw the full thing to begin with and then erase later. Then we start to draw the scales that run along the lip of T-Rex's mouth. Think of it like drawing a whole bunch of M's that go along its lip. Then we'll add a few more of those vertical lines that run up from the lip, and that acts as more skin texture. And then we start tidying up the front of the snout, erasing the middle section, and replacing it with a series of lumps that will go along the snout. And now we're going to bring our attention back towards Indominus Rex, specifically its neck area, which is very reminiscent of an Ankylosaurus back. And that's because of the lines I've used to divide each segment, which looks very much like the armor of Ankylosaurus. You'll also notice I've done 3 rows of spikes per segment, and each spike has a very short side and a very long side. Now we're going to refine Indominus Rex's back using a much thicker refined line, drawing a line for the top of its pelvic bone or hip bone, and then we're going to strengthen its line for its shoulder. And speaking of its shoulder, you'll notice that the shoulder line to its back doesn't align with the back of its neck, so we need to redraw that. And going back to its arm section of its shoulder, you'll notice that we'll now start putting in more detail for its arm, and then we're going to put in Tyrannosaurus Rex's shoulder blade, adding a few extra skin folds that continue from the neck to the shoulder. This is also the point where we're going to add in some ribs. You can't really see them too well at the moment, but we're gradually drawing them in bit by bit. You don't have to put too much detail in, but drawing one line per rib is enough to give it that brief indentation look. And now we're going to draw a line that continues on from those dots that we drew along T-Rex's neck. We're going to follow it down over the shoulder blades, along its back, over its hip, and down its tail, and this will give a further impression of three-dimensionalism and make it look a lot less flat. I also like to add a few little lines on the left and the right hand side of the thigh. I just find it makes it a little bit more stretchy in appearance and it looks more organic, I find. Then I like to use a line running up the leg, and this gives it a bit more of a muscular look. I then think to myself that the area in front of the leg would probably be more prone to bending and flexing, so I add a few more lines in there to add that. I refined the knee some more, and then I start to draw in the line for the calf muscle. I also like adding a few little lines under the skin where the muscles would be stretching and bending, and then I decided to gently erase a bit of the line so the calf muscle isn't as dark. I'm adding this line for underneath the rib section, and I'm also adding this line for underneath the pelvis and the beginning at the bottom of the tail. We're going to darken up that line for the belly, adding in a series of lines that indicate the bending of the skin of the neck. And then we're going to refine and darken up the line for the back of the neck, as well as the back spine. We're going to add an extra little line for the hip, and then continuing on from that line of the spine, we're going to continue that line down to the back of the tail, as well as adding a little bit more to the neck. Now, we're going to add some lines here, and these indicate the point in the skin where it'll be stretching with the tail's bending movements. We're going to draw in another muscle line into the thigh, a line here for a tendon protrusion, and then we're going to start drawing in T-Rex's right leg. Just keep in mind that sometimes getting the proportions right for the legs can get a little bit tricky, so you might have to erase it and redraw it again a few times just to get it right. But first, before we continue on with the leg, we're going to take a brief detour back to the tail, and I'm going to draw a long line along the length of the tail, and this line will indicate the main muscle along the tail, which will also follow the line that goes from the back over the hip. I felt the need to include that because the tail was looking a bit empty compared to the body. Now going back to the leg, I noticed that actually it's a little bit out of proportion compared to the left leg. It's a little bit too long, so we're going to need to erase that and draw it again, but because it's pencil, it's not that big of a deal. I'm bringing us closer in now so you can get a better look at the detail as we reshape and redraw the leg. And you'll notice that from the very faint leftovers of the original leg that I've shifted the circle for the ankle a little bit closer towards the knee so it makes it a little bit shorter and more in proportion with the other leg. Now because we've lifted the heel and ankle area higher up because T-Rex is taking a step, that also means that the foot's going to be lifted. So it might take a few attempts, but we're going to need to decide if the foot's going to be lifted but the toes are still going to be touching the ground, or if the entire foot's going to be lifted. And because of the complexity of the proportions of lifting a foot up, sometimes you're going to have to redraw it a few times just to get it to look right. And spoiler alert, I didn't quite like how this attempt at the foot looked, so consider this a bit of a practice round of drawing a foot. Also because of the way that I drew this particular image, I actually wanted to adjust this foot while adjusting the other foot, so basically I raised it, and because I thought that the toes were a little bit too tall and chunky, I decided to flatten them down a bit. And you'll notice I used some basic circles and ovals to start those toes. Now moving back to the right leg, I'm going to start using some darker lines to start refining the ankle and shin area. I'm also shaping out the shape of the toes around the initial sketch area, and because the T-Rex foot's been lifted, I'm trying to draw out the shape of the bottom of the foot as well. This involves drawing the bottom backside of the toe, which can be a bit tricky to get to look right, so I added in the side tip of one of the claws, and then drawing the back of the far right toe. And then we'll draw in a dew claw, which just basically looks like a finger with a claw attached to it. Now moving back to that other foot now, we're going to continue on by drawing a larger round oval for the middle toe, and then I'm going to attach some claws to each of the toes. Then I'm going to draw the top of the toes, emphasizing that lumpy nature at the end of the toe that connects to the toenail, and then drawing the fleshy padding underneath each of the toe segments under the foot. We'll complete the middle toe by drawing that curved line that represents the bump that connects to the toenail, and then we'll color in each of the claws. Eventually we're going to add a little bit of white to give them some shine, but for now, just keep it black. Now while we're not at the detailing stage of this drawing just yet, I do like to add a bunch of scales that run along the top of the toes. Technically these are called scutes. I like to draw them long and narrow and giving them a slightly rounded flat edge. And as I get further to the area where the toe connects to the ankle, I tend to make those scales look a little bit more angular, broader, and then eventually circular. I'm also going to replay this a little bit quickly because I actually refined the ankle area as well. Might have missed it as we were drawing the scales. And now that we've got most of the main part of that foot out of the way, we're going to take our attention back to the other foot which is being lifted, and we're going to start drawing the detail of under its feet, starting at the heel. I've started drawing a soft line running down along the toe, which kind of shows the corner between the left side and the bottom side of the toe. And I'm going to start drawing some faint circles that kind of represent the padding that you see underneath your cat or dog paw prints. It's also at this point where I'm going to have to actually apologize in advance, because this is where things are going to get very complicated, as you can tell by the amount of erasing and redrawing that I've done. Basically, I'm trying to reshape the foot so it looks a little bit more in proportion and makes a little bit more sense. So I'm erasing some lines, redrawing some lines, kind of sculpting and reshaping the foot. And even at this point, I still wasn't liking how it was looking. It kind of looked a little bit twisted in a weird way. It looked out of proportion. I was trying to think to myself how to actually get this to look right, because, I mean, it's a tutorial. I'm trying to make it make sense, but visually it wasn't even making sense to me. So at the end of the day, I just kind of had to erase the whole thing and start from scratch. And that's exactly what I did. Practice makes perfect. So again, we're blocking out the layout of the leg using circles for the joints. This will help keep the proportions as accurate as we can get it. And because last time it looked a little bit weird and twisted, this time we're keeping the foot at a more flat profile angle. I've used a curved line for the arch of the heel, placing a lump over here for the middle big toe, and then shaping out the shin, calf and ankle a little bit more, refining the underneath of the foot and the heel a little bit more, shaping the big toe some more, including a toe claw, refining in the back heel a little bit more, and then adding a line that's going to work as a bit of tendon detail for the foot. And speaking of the foot, you'll notice that the foot is actually shorter than the other foot. That's because it's lifting its foot a little bit higher up, so only the tips of the toes are keeping contact with the ground. So imagine for a moment that you're on your tippy toes. This is kind of like the balls of your feet still planted on the ground, and this area is kind of like your heel being lifted up off the ground. And now that we've got the basic proportions done, I want to make the leg a little bit straighter, so I'm going to erase it again, and I'm going to bring the leg in a little bit more to make it look a little bit straighter and narrower. Keep in mind that every time I erase, I'm redrawing the detail again, and each reattempt is getting us closer and closer to that end result that we're looking for. You'll also notice that when I redrew the foot, I actually changed it again to make it look like it's less on its tippy toes and a little bit more pointed outwards. It also has that stretched vibe to it, so it's not on its tippy toes, but it's a little bit more stretched, leaning forward. And as I continue to reshape and refine the leg some more, I'm continuously asking myself, does it look in proportion? Does it look anatomically correct? And I come to the conclusion that while I'm drawing the ankle heel area, that I kind of want to lift the leg up again and go back to that tippy toe form. So we go back to shaping the leg by erasing some lines, adding some new lines, refining the shape, pretty much like a sculpture really. You gradually over time reshape the form bit by bit until it fits your vision, but you'll be glad to know this is the last time we actually change the leg. From here on we'll simply be adding details to the leg later on. Now focusing on the big picture again for a little while, I'm going to refine the tail, adding an extra line and removing another line, just changing the shape even more gradually. And while these minor adjustments to the line, shifting them a little bit at a time, might not seem like that big of a deal to begin with, in the long run, all those minor adjustments have a huge impact on the accuracy of the image when it's finished. Now moving back into T-Rex's leg for a brief moment, we're going to add a few wrinkles underneath its ankle, and we're also going to erase some of those foundation lines just to tidy up the leg a bit more. Then we're going to strengthen the top line of T-Rex's tail, and then we're also going to strengthen up the line for T-Rex's thigh and calf muscles. After all that, we're going to continue to refine and strengthen the line around T-Rex's arms and fingers, as well as making its claws more defined. And then because of the way they just unconsciously work, I add even more tiny little bits of detail. After all that's done, I begin to tidy up the image by erasing all the foundation lines around the leg, the tail and the thigh area. Also notice that there's a lot of messy lines around the back, which I'm going to erase now. And then I'm going to include even more lines along the bottom line of the tail, which is kind of like the muscle coming underneath the skin. This shows that the skin actually moves over the muscles. Then we'll include a very subtle line for the shoulder bowl, and then we'll return our attention back to this leg where we will draw the scute scales that run along the top of its toes right up to its shin. This will be done in just the same way as we did the other foot, including a few little scute scales for the dew claw. Now we're going to readjust something else to do with the leg, but don't worry, it's not that big of a deal, we're simply rearranging some of the thigh muscle lines. You see, from time to time I like to go back to some reference images just to look over it and make sure everything's on the right track, and you'll notice compared to the reference images, I added too many muscle lines. So we're simply going to erase them, and we're going to draw that main muscle line and a few little tiny lines just to emphasize the muscle nature. I lighten up this hip line because it doesn't need to be quite so dominant, and then I experiment with this ridge line along the back, but then I realize I probably don't really need it. I do, however, draw a line running along the neck area, and I find that that helps make the neck look less flat and more three-dimensional. This line represents the flexing that happens in the skin when the leg moves, and this faint line over here is the beginning point of what will eventually be a scratch mark that comes from Indominus Rex's claw. So while all these lines might seem insignificant right now, collectively they're all very important in the build-up of the final image. Here, we're refining the neck a little bit more, and we're adding a brief line here for the knee. And that also marks the finishing point of the main drawing of T-Rex. After that, it's just going to be mainly details, and now we'll focus on Indominus Rex. We're going to re-sculpt Indominus Rex's back a little bit more, making it less flat and a little bit more curved. Then, we're going to draw a series of spike rows that run along Indominus Rex's back, very similar to its neck. Think of it like drawing a bunch of mini shark fins along its back. Technically, they're called osteoderms, and crocodiles have a far less pronounced version of these along their back. And actually, speaking of crocodiles, what we're about to draw now are a bunch of lines that act as divisions between each segment, very similar to what a crocodile's back looks like. We're going to draw a small scattering of scales along its side, as well as a little bit extra for its armpit, and then I'm going to take you close in on the neck, so you can get a better look at the detail as I'm refining the osteoderm spikes. But we're not quite done with the spikes yet, because we've got to draw them along the length of Indominus Rex's tail as well. And much like these wrinkle lines of T-Rex, I like to add a few little lines onto Indominus Rex's tail as well. And when you take into account the fact that Indominus Rex's base genes are actually Tyrannosaurus Rex, you can treat the drawing of some of the areas in a similar fashion. That said, Indominus Rex's legs seem far more muscular, so I've drawn a few more lines in the thigh area to represent that muscular nature. Indominus Rex's shin and calves are drawn pretty much in the same way as Tyrannosaurus Rex's, but its feet are somewhat different, so I'm going to zoom in now and show you a little bit more detailed view of how we're going to draw its feet. When we draw this line coming down from the ankle, pay close attention to where that curve ends. I noticed that when studying these videos, that there's a bit of an indentation behind the foot just behind the ankle, and this doesn't seem all that present in Rexy's foot, so remembering to draw that trait of its heel will help add that little bit of extra detail, and I'm quite particular when it comes to detail accuracy. Continuing on now, we'll start drawing in Indominus Rex's calf muscles, as well as the front side of its ankle. Then, I'm going to draw some circles and ovals, which will act as proportion points for the toes. Also, make sure you study that curve that I put in the toe, because each toe will be a little thicker and a little rounder at the point where the toe claws connect. Then I'm going to finish the underneath of its foot, and then I'm going to finish that tendon in the heel. Moving back out now to a wider view of the image, and I'm going to put a placeholder knee circle. And I'm mainly putting that circle there as a visual reference for the anatomical proportions. Then we're going to darken up the line for the shin so it's the same darkness as the other shin's line. Then I'm drawing some folding stretch lines that connect the leg to the torso. And then I draw a series of scales running along the stomach. Think of it very much like a snake or another kind of lizard where it has a bunch of row-like scales along its stomach. And now, it's time for us to focus our attention on Indominus Rex's shoulders, arms, and hand. Because its arms are a little bit long at the moment, what we're going to do is we're going to raise most of the foundation of that, and we're going to start from there. This point in the elbow is a better place to start at, and what we're going to do is draw a triangular rectangle, or basically a rectangle that tapers in at the wrist. Then we'll taper it back out, giving a bit more of a curved look, and this will form the back of the hand. Then I start drawing out the length of the fingers, giving it some ball joints, and this gives a basic impression of the finger. And because I want a basis for where the bottom finger goes, I'm actually going to refine the wrist and forearm so I can get a better idea of where things are going to be placed. Using the top finger and the bottom point of the wrist, I use these as visual markers on where to place the middle and the bottom finger. And while we're in this area, we might as well draw in Rex's arm while we're here because it's looking a bit plain at the moment in that area. You'll also notice that when I block in the lower finger, I don't actually stick with the original plan of that circle. And that's because the circle is more of a guide, you don't really have to stick with it. I think the finger looks a little bit better higher up. Then we're going to draw a nice thin but long claw, as well as the scratch line that claw made. The middle finger will be longer than the other two fingers. Then we'll proceed to draw a line for the knuckle and the padding for that finger. Also, Indominus Rex is known for that really long middle claw, so don't forget to draw a little scratch mark just after it. Then we'll start to do the same thing for the top finger, adding a nice bit of padding at the end of the tip. And while I draw the underside of the finger, I've also included some circles so you can kind of get an idea where the knuckle joints are. And you'll also notice I drew the finger shorter than I originally sketched it, and that's because the middle finger is the longest one. Then I'll complete the knuckle and the underneath padding for the middle finger. Then I do the same for the bottom finger. Then we're going to complete the top claw, and then we're going to go and strengthen the rest of the forearm lines. Now if you don't want to worry about doing scales, you don't have to add this part, but because we're near the end of the main drawing section of these two dinosaurs, I'm just going to scatter in a few little scales. The scales that run along its hand and its fingers, however, I do find are very important to include, and I always draw them myself. I include them on the hands, and I draw them on the toes and the feet, as well as the lips. These scales that are called scutes are fairly easy to draw once you've got enough practice in, and they're that little bit of detail that really makes a dinosaur's hand and feet look like dinosaur hands and feet. Now we're going to tidy up the arm and the hands, erasing a lot of those underlying foundation lines, and then we're going to draw one last very nice long scratch mark along T-Rex's torso. After scattering the last few scales on the hands, we're going to focus our attention on finishing its other leg. It's very similar to drawing its right leg, just in a slightly different position. So the ankle area will be a little bit more vertical, and because the inside of its leg is visible to us, we're also going to draw a dew claw on its ankle area as well. We'll add a line for its calf muscle, and we'll also refine the shape of its shin. Again, it's very similar to the right leg, so just use the right leg as an example. We're going to zoom in on its right foot now, and we're going to finish off the detail in its claws and in its scales. After finishing up the shape of its claws, we'll also finish up the shape of its upper foot. And yes, finishing up the shape is quite the tongue twister. Now reverting back to our trusty reference clip, you get an idea of how the scute scales run along the feet. We'll also draw a few of them along the ankles, spreading them out a little bit. And once we've done that, we're going to bring our attention back to the left foot. Don't pay a huge amount of attention to the foot in the main image, because as you can probably tell, I actually drew it a little bit too low and is slightly out of proportion. So through the magic of television, or YouTube as it were, I managed to edit it so it was more in proportion. So just like with the right foot, we'll use circles as position points for the toes, then we'll draw the lines for above the toes. Keep in mind that because of the way that the foot's positioned, it's going to be slightly bendier. Then we're going to draw the underneath of that foot, again keeping in mind of that indentation just behind the foot. And then we'll complete the shape of each toe, capping them off with their own toenail claws. We're on the home stretch now, we've nearly finished. All we have to do now is draw a series of those scute scales to run along each of the top of the toes, and then we'll finish up the shape of the toes, finish off the claw, and then we're done. From this point on, all you really need to do now is just erase some of the foundation lines, tidy up some lines. You can work on that tail if you want. I'll be doing that in the next video. You can also try your hand at drawing the other arm if you really want. I didn't actually get around to doing that because I didn't really feel like it needed it, but if you want to, you can. But really, any more tweaking or fine tuning you want to do now, you should be able to do by yourself with my teachings if I've done a good job hopefully. Use your imagination, add more if you want, or just leave it there if you wish. In part 2 of this video, I actually will be refining, tidying things up, and adding a lot more detail, including drawing a background, shading and other renderings. But for this video, we're going to leave it here, so hopefully you've enjoyed this video, hopefully you've learnt something, hopefully you enjoyed drawing along as well. Be sure to email me your results, beaniedraws@hotmail.com, or tag me on Instagram. If you do that, you might find one of your submissions end up in one of my videos. So make sure you've hit that bell notification once you've subscribed so you make sure you don't miss out on part 2. And with all that being said, simply thank you for watching, hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time. Cheerio for now.